Howdy, everyone. Okay, so now I have, like I had just talked about, I've got the fairing in alignment with my references on the floor. With it held in that position, I marked these 4 hole locations, and I went ahead and drilled those, and of course now I've got them clecoed. There really isn't a lot of wiggle room here. The plans, the written instructions is very specific about this line being drawn 1 inch back from the edge, the bracket here being at 90 degrees, and then you line up the feet of the bracket with the drawn line on the fairing. So that basically gets held in place. And then everything else gets kind of adjusted off of that, if you will. So now that that is done, like I said, I've got my cleco spacer in here. That aligns the fairing with my reference on the ground. So now at this point, this bracket gets tucked back underneath the fairing back in this area back here. So in order to locate those holes for drilling, I have to use the magnets. The magnets are talked about in the instructions. They're referenced section 5. The written instructions for doing the wheel fairings references using the magnets, and they direct you to look at section 5 of the manual, and it walks you through the process of using the magnets. It's very, very simple. I'm going to do that next. Let me get this fairing off, and we'll do that. But another thing real quick, just a couple of things. Like I was showing you yesterday, just doing a visual from up on top, you can see the alignment. There are also other checks. If you look at the written instructions and you look at the plans, as written and as drawn, this is pretty much the method that Vans uses. They don't talk about making a jig and using lasers and things of that nature. That stuff is great. I have no problems with that. It's a lot more accurate than what I'm doing. What I'm doing is basically what Vans has in their instructions. So if it's good enough for them, it's plenty good enough for me. But there are some other dimensions that they talk about. One is, of course, when you have both fairings in work, you want them to be parallel to each other. So you want this tip, this trailing edge compared to that trailing edge. That distance needs to be the same. I'm sorry, let me back up. The distance from this trailing edge to the fuselage center line needs to be the same from the fuselage center line to your other trailing edge. And then the front nose, that distance from the center line of the nose to this fuselage center line needs to be the same distance as that wheel fairing nose to the aircraft center line. I've basically done that with the layout here that I just talked about. There is also a dimension from the center of the trailing edge height, the center of the trailing edge down to the floor. There's a measurement for that. And again, you want both sides to be equal. For me personally, a visual measurement or a visual check. Again, that bracket inside here is at a 90-degree angle. It is supposed to be in line with the line that you had drawn on the inside. In theory, that should put this front edge at a 90-degree angle. So you can use a carpenter's square or a laser, whatever you want, just to see if this front edge is in fact 90 degrees. You can do another visual check from up above, and this is just purely a visual, I don't know what you want to call it. It's not accurate, but you can just kind of see the edge of the fairing here in relation to the tire and the center line. If the fairing was off, this front edge would not be at a 90-degree angle to the tire. You'd be able to see that it's cocked one way or the other. So again, it's not scientific. It may not be as fun as jigs and lasers, but Again, it's just multiple ways of checking to make sure that your measurements are correct and the fairing is correct. So now at this point, now that I've bored you to death, I'm going to take that fairing off and we're going to get out the magnets. Stand by. All right, so this is how simple this actually is using the magnets. These are the magnets here. They're just little ball magnets. They're very strong. So I take 2 of them. In the baggie, I don't know how many individual magnets I've got, maybe 10 or more. And then there are also these little plastic washers. I'll get into those here in a minute. There's a bunch of these as well. So anywho, these are the holes. These are the 2 nut plate holes that I'm trying to locate on the fairing. So I put a magnet on each nut plate. I'm going to put the fairing back on, and then I'll come back to it. Stand by. All right, so again, I have the magnets in place. I got the fairing back on, and you want to make sure that you have it clecoed and you have it in alignment and you're ready to mark these other holes. So now I've got a magnet on the outside of the fairing, which you can see here, and the magnet will find its way to the other magnet below. So there's a magnet there, and then there's another one down, oops. See, where'd it go? All right, there's one there. Let me see. I'm trying to see where the other one would be. All right, so that's the bottom hole, and then there's another one up here. So there's a hole there, or a magnet, and then there's a magnet down here. And you can see how it finds where it needs to be. It's pretty slick. So now, I'll show you this after I get it set up. But then you take one of these plastic washers and you stick this underneath the magnet. The magnet will hold this in place. While this is held in place with the magnet, you tape it down. Then you can remove the magnet, then you can remove the fairing, and then you can drill your hole. So I'll show you that here in a second. All right, so you can see now that I have one magnet holding the plastic washer in place. That's this guy here. You can see how it will find that other magnet below it. And then I've got the other one already located and taped. So with the magnet holding the washer in place, I'll tape down this washer and I'll take the magnet off. Then I'll carefully take the fairing off and I'll use those washers to locate the holes. That's as simple as it gets. So I'll do that and then I'll come back and see how it all fits. If I can back up for a moment, I would recommend doing the magnets in the back, doing those one at a time. The holes are close enough to one another that if you do 2 magnets at once, they interfere with each other a little bit. And I didn't like that. So I took the fairing off. I took one magnet off of the bracket on the back side. I took the one magnet off. And I put everything back together. And now this magnet here is a lot more, what can I say? It's a lot more secure because it only has one place to go. When I had the other magnet nearby, it seemed to interfere with this one, and I didn't like that. So now I've got just the one, and this goes right to it every time. So like I had just shown, at this point I'll tape down the washer. I'll take this off. I'll put the magnet on the other nut plate, put the fairing back together, put the magnet on, tape down the washer, take the magnets off, take the fairing off, locate those holes using the washers as a guide, and then drill.